If we were to treat the history of the Roman Empire as a crime scene, we wouldn't start with the daggers in the Senate. We would start with the crumbs on the emperor's table. Most rulers throughout history used the banquet as a weapon of shock and awe, a display of gold plate and exotic peacocks designed to make the guest feel small. But Augustus, the man who turned a dying republic into a personal monarchy, did something far more dangerous. He ate like a commoner. While his predecessors competed in a race of decadent excess, Augustus sat in the shadows of the Palatine Hill, nibbling on a piece of coarse hand-pressed bread and a few tiny, pungent sardines. This wasn't a lack of appetite, it was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. By rejecting the luxury of the elite, he was performing a silent, daily autopsy on the very idea of Roman power. He understood that in a city exhausted by civil war and greedy generals, a leader who appeared to want nothing was a leader who could be trusted with everything. Every bite of bitter olive and every sip of watered-down wine was a calculated piece of evidence in a larger trial. Today, we are not just looking at a menu of snacks, we are analyzing this historical menu as a forensic autopsy of power. To understand why Augustus chose to eat like a peasant, we have to look at the wreckage of the Roman Republic he inherited. Before him, the Roman dinner table, the convivium, was a battlefield of status. The late Republic was defined by competitive decadence. Men like Lucullus were famous for spending fortunes on single meals, importing songbirds' tongues, and keeping live sea creatures in heated marble tanks just to prove they could. In this climate, luxury was a scent of rot. It signaled a leader who put personal pleasure above the state. Augustus saw this and performed a radical pivot. He replaced the golden plate with the social autopsy of simplicity. His diet consisted of three primary pillars: coarse bread, panis secundarius, small fishes, sardines or anchovies, and moist cheese pressed by hand. To the average Roman citizen, this wasn't just food, it was a moral signal. The bread was the most significant. In Rome's strict social stratification, the whiter and finer your bread, the higher your status. By choosing secundarius, a dark, gritty loaf containing the bran and husks usually reserved for the working poor, Augustus was visually and physically aligning himself with the plebs. He wasn't a king perched above them, he was the princeps, the first among equals. It was a brilliant move of underestimated authority. If the emperor eats the same bread as the soldier in the trench, how can the soldier ever claim the emperor doesn't understand his sacrifice? However, this simplicity was a controlled excess of its own. While he ate little, he provided bread and circuses for the masses on a scale never before seen. As historian Suetonius notes, Augustus was almost pathologically private about his eating habits, often dining alone before a banquet or snacking at odd hours on a litter. This created a labor hierarchy where his staff had to be ready to provide simple food at a moment's notice 24 hours a day. It takes more logistical effort to maintain a facade of accidental simplicity than it does to host a scheduled feast. His rejection of the elite diet was a political execution of the old senatorial class. By making frugality the new fashion of the imperial court, he stripped the old aristocrats of their primary way of showing off. He turned their gold into a symbol of guilt. He wasn't just eating a sardine, he was using that sardine to signal that the era of the greedy warlord was over and the era of the disciplined systemic administrator had begun. He used his stomach to prove that he possessed the gravitas and auctoritas to rule the world, precisely because he could rule his own desires. To truly understand the calculated austerity of Augustus, we have to move away from the marble statues and into the heat of a reconstructed Roman kitchen. We aren't making a feast, we are making a survival kit. I've sourced the components for his favorite traveler's meal, a heavy, dark loaf of panis secundarius, a jar of salt-cured sardines, and fresh, bitter green olives. The first thing you notice is the texture of the grain. To make the secondary bread, I'm not using the fine milled flour of the Roman elite. I'm using a stone-ground whole wheat, leaving in the bran and the grit. In the Roman world, milling was a brutal labor. To get the flour fine enough for the white bread of the wealthy, slaves would have to pass the grain through sieves of Spanish linen over and over. By choosing the coarser grind, Augustus was bypassing hours of human misery, or at least appearing to. But as I knead this dough, the physical reality sets in. This bread is dense, it's heavy, it requires significant jaw strength to chew. This is soldier's food. It stays in the stomach longer, providing a slow-burning fuel for a man who claimed to work through the night for the sake of the empire. Next, we look at the sardines. In the ancient Mediterranean, fish was a commodity of extreme variables. You had the fresh, exotic mullets that fetched higher prices than the slaves who cooked them. And then you had the salted small fish. These were the protein of the masses, preserved in brine to survive long marches. Opening a jar of these, the smell is aggressive, salty, fishy, and raw. There's no cream sauce here to hide the flavor. I'm preparing the olives now, and this is where the explorer meets the sage. In the Roman mind, the olive was the ultimate symbol of pax, peace. An olive tree takes years to mature. You cannot grow them in a war zone. By eating these, Augustus was literally consuming the peace of Augustus, Pax Augusta. But these aren't the buttery, mild olives we find in modern jars. These are cured in a way that retains a sharp tannic bitterness. When you sit down with this plate, the sensory experience is one of friction. The bread is abrasive, the fish is intensely salty, and the olives are bitter. There is no pleasure here in the modern sense. It is an exercise in discipline. As I take a bite of the bread, topped with a single sardine, I realize the judgment call his cooks had to make. To serve the most powerful man on earth a meal this humble is a high-wire act. If the bread is too soft, it looks like he's gone soft. If the fish is too expensive, the message of frugality is lost. This recreation reveals the structural truth. Augustus's simplicity was an incredibly expensive performance. It required a global supply chain, wheat from Egypt, olives from Italy, fish from the coast, to be delivered to his private quarters so he could look like he didn't need any of it. It's the food equivalent of a billionaire wearing a $500 plain gray t-shirt. It looks like nothing, but it represents the absolute peak of resource control. Every time he ate this in front of a guest, he was reminding them that while they were slaves to their palates, he was the master of his. When we reassemble the evidence of Augustus's table, the simple meal is revealed as the ultimate political autopsy. The coarse bread confirms his calculated connection to the common man. The salted fish reveals his identity as the tireless commander. And the bitter olives communicate a peace bought through absolute authority. He didn't eat for sustenance or for pleasure. He ate for legacy. By the time he died, Augustus had transformed the Roman world, not through the visible chains of a tyrant, but through the subtle psychological influence of a leader who appeared to share the burdens of his people. He understood that the loudest statement a ruler can make is often found in what they choose to leave off the plate. His stomach was the final frontier of his administration, a place where the chaotic greed of the old republic was finally brought to heel. We've looked at the crumbs, the salt, and the grit, and found a man who ruled an empire by pretending he didn't want it. It's a reminder that history isn't just written in blood and marble, it's baked into the very crust of the bread we leave behind. We don't just cook ancient food, we decode the civilizations behind them.